Welcome to part 2. We're excited you're here to continue the conversation with us. Let's dive right in and pick up where we left off.
That's really interesting. So what happened after that? Like the vehicle moved. What were the next steps? You figured out, wow, we're really onto something.
So when we figured out, okay, that's really working what we're doing here, and this really has the potential to grow. Obviously, it felt that we had still a lot of time to do the planning, what's after the grant, because obviously at a certain point the grant ends, what also means that your money ends. For this point, we slowly, and I really mean slowly, started to look for how to get into the next funding stage, because I would say besides family and friends, public grants are very often a starting point for a startup, because it's money that you can more or less freely use and that is accessible. So that was also our starting point. But the obvious next step is that you need to think of, okay, how we can finance the project further and beyond a public grant. So at this point, of course, the tech team still strongly focused on developing a product and improving the overall system. And my job, as I'm not an engineer, quite far from an engineer, my job at this point was to start thinking, okay, how can we transfer this idea from the grant phase to either a VC-backed phase, a bootstrapped phase, or what would be our way to finance what we are currently doing and to proceed with this. The most obvious solution for every startup, let's go to the VCs, pitch your idea, and you will get a ton of money and continue working with what you're doing. Unfortunately, that's most of the time not really true. So you're going to a lot of VCs and they will all listen to you and most of the time tell you that it's a great idea and that they would be interested in talking to you on a later stage, which basically means that they're not interested, but a more friendly way of saying it, which is absolutely fair, because most of them are focused either on a specific stage, a specific technology, or a stack of technology. So, but that was also the first learning we had, or especially I had, that it's very important to also understand the other side, not only your side, because your demand is, I would say, quite clear. You need money to further grow and to further improve. But on the other side, the VC has the money, but he is also not spending it randomly. There is a very precise investment thesis behind it. They are having a very precise look at your company and especially the founders team, if this is really what or where they want to invest their money. The step in between was, and that was more or less already given, Access Forschungstransfer has 2 stages. The first stage we started with, and the second stage, way less money, but also kind of easier to acquire, because if you were successful in the first stage, then it's almost certain that you will get the second stage. And this second stage, right following after the first one, is also made for financing the time where you as a founders team are finding money. So that should provide the opportunity to you to still have some runtime to find a new way of how to fund your company. At a certain point, there was the decision to make, okay, either we stop doing what we are doing because there will be no money, or we maybe need to find another way of how to proceed. And right next to the VC money, at least on a second view, more obvious way of funding a company is customer money. Because in the end, at a certain point, you will need a customer who is willing to pay for your product, because otherwise you will never have a successful venture. And so we had the decision, stop what we're doing or looking for another source of money. And we luckily decided for still going the extra mile and still putting the effort into it. And we're looking for customer money, looking really for a customer who is willing to pay us for what we are actually doing.
Maybe one point that would be really interesting to me as a listener is, I've heard it from a lot of founders that there will be a really stressful time, and you've experienced it as well. What were tools or things you did to maintain your vision, to maintain the speed, to be motivated to work on the project and not be blocked by the stress factor?
I think the first and maybe also most important point was that the commitment of the founders team was still given. So whenever we were talking about the situation and how to proceed, it was always a common sense that we are continuing. So there was never someone or a single person who said, okay, I don't want to continue. And that was, in my opinion and my experience, really important, because that at least gave you a secure home base so that you could be sure that the founders team is still committed to the topic and is still willing to press on and to continue working. So the founders team and its commitment was very important, that this was given at any time. And the second point that also kept us going was that whenever we've been talking to customers, the response was positive. So they've been always interested and they always saw the opportunity in the technology and the benefits it's providing. That doesn't mean in the first place that they will immediately give you money, but the positive market feedback from the outlook we could provide to them was also a factor that kept us in the mindset we have the chance to really make it and we have the chance to acquire a customer project.
That's really beautiful also, that especially that the team was working so aligned and that everyone had that common vision in their head and no one was like asking themselves, so is this really working or why should we do it? So I think probably resilience is also a big word that you could put out there for the team. Do you have critical success factors for the team in your head? Like what you should look for when building a team for a startup?
I think it might be a very obvious one and cited a lot of times, but complementarity is extremely important. So whenever you're building a team, you always need both sides. You, at least if you're building a technical product, you need someone who's responsible and able to execute technology, but you also need someone who is able and willing to execute the management side. And if you only have one of both sides, then you will extremely likely either over-engineer or under-engineer. Because if you're only focused on the management side, then you want to go fast to market and you want to fast revenues and you want to fast grow, you will miss out on the product. And on the other side, if you have a great engineering team that only covers the engineering side, then for sure you will have an outstanding product, but probably with features no one was asking for, and for this reason, for a very high price. So complementarity is one very important point, and that's also why either single founders or founder teams that are smaller than 3, or at least statistically, that's never a general rule that always applies. There is a sweet spot on how big your founders team should be to at least have the chance to really cover all the fields of expertise you need to cover. So whenever you are between 3 and 5 people, it's very likely that you're able to cover the tech side as well as the management side, and in best case, even a sales side, someone who's really passionate about selling your product. So that is one very important point, complementarity. And the second very important point, you really need to like the people you're working together. So they do not need to be necessarily your best friends, but you really need to like, and in the best case, to know the people you're working together and founding together. But because the point is, you will spend with this founders team, you will spend way more time compared to your family, your friends, your spouse. These are the people you will spend most of your time. I would
Intense time.
Exactly. Intense, a lot, and stressful. And if you don't really like those people, and if you don't know how they are reacting when it's going to be stressful, then you will face a very hard time in keeping the team together and really work into the same direction without leaving someone behind or someone working into another direction. A third important learning is that frame your rules as soon as possible, whenever you have the chance to do so. That starts on how to distribute your shares on the company. This is how to distribute the different tasks. And this is also about evaluating who is the best person for this task. Because whenever everyone knows what is his job and whenever he likes what he is doing, then it's already an advantage because he simply likes what he's doing, and this increases the chance that he's really good in it. And when this is not communicated very clearly, then either you're doing work, two people are doing the same work, or no one is doing the work in the worst case. Whenever you have the chance, really frame extremely clearly who is doing which task, who is holding which stake in the company, and everyone needs to be happy with this. Especially when it comes to share distribution, if only one person is not happy, the likelihood that you will implode at a certain point is super high, because that creates kind of a ongoing and piling up unhappiness that at a certain point will kick in, and then the whole team and the whole venture is in danger. So make really clear rules, distribute as soon as possible, and really make clear who is having which task.
That's really, really incredibly strong advice, actually. I really agree. Can you summarize that, like, setting the stage and the roles and the tasks and the responsibilities is really important to have that upward propelling effect? Like, it's a treadmill that can be negatively and a treadmill that can also be positively, right? So if it's set in a good way, the whole team is thriving. But if something's not working out, like, it has the opposite direction of a spiral.
Exactly.
So then, like, this incredible team that you've just mentioned was there, and you knew that VC money is not going to come. We have to bootstrap this venture. Having in mind getting a customer is easy. Getting a customer is hard.
Definitely.
How did you start to get your first pilot customers?
We've been, in the first place, looking for the most obvious sources and the sources where we had the best and closest connection already or established. And as we've been active in a very niche field and a very science-related field still, for us, an obvious way was to collaborate with the university we've been spinning off from. So the University of Federal Armed Forces, or Bundeswehr University here in Munich, was the institution where we've been spinning off from. So for us, a quite logical step was to get in touch with them and ask if we could not collaborate only on a scientific base, but also a scientific base that includes a revenue component. So we've been talking to them, and we've been treated as everyone else from outside. So we also had to apply for certain jobs. Job is maybe the wrong word, for certain fields of research they offered and which they basically outsourced to external companies because it was not their field of focus or whatever reason.
Ausschreibungen.
Exactly. So we've been screening those Ausschreibungen and then looking for the ones who fit our field of expertise and then applying for them, which is painful, to be very honest. The process is extremely complex. It requires lots of documents, which you likely not even have as a young company. And for this reason, it's probably not the easiest way to get to the point of revenue. But for us, it was simply the way to go because that was the highest chance of success. And we did so, made some of those applications in a successful way. So we acquired the contracts, and then, at least at this point, we had our first step made into the right direction, and could still keep going and like survive on a company side, which still was a rough time. So money was always like an extremely critical resource because when you got the contract from the university, they of course expected also results, and there were payment terms and stuff like this you also need to take into account. But nevertheless, this was working out in the first step, and this also gave us the opportunity to kind of bootstrap over those public contracts we got, and then in parallel looking for more industry related customers. So the first step for us was look at the most obvious resource you have, and what is also, I think, very important, you need a good relationship to this resource, because then the likelihood of getting a contract from them also increases a lot.
Have you applied to any like venture, how's it called?
Venture clienting.
Venture clienting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you looked for venture clienting solutions? Because in the EV field and in the automotive field, sometimes I know they operate that kind of way.
Yes, we did. It on first glance it looks quite nice, and if it like fits to your situation, I think it's a really great opportunity to fund the company. In our case, we never really found a perfect match where we would have been able to provide what they were asking for. And on the other side, we've been never really happy on the context they were expecting from us. So either what they requested from our side was simply too much, and at this point not an amount of work or also a result we could provide to them. Or on the other side, the terms that were connected to this venture clienting were simply not really attractive. The core word here is how to distribute IP in such a context. Because very oftentimes, whenever you get such a venture clienting contract, you're not receiving the money only for the results you're providing, but in the terms, oftentimes it's included that everything you have been doing during and for this contract is handed over to the customer in this case. Also meaning that every connected or like included IP is also handed over to the customer. And as a startup, IP is, I would say, your major asset you have.
Of course, yeah.
And if this is always gone whenever you like finish the contract, I mean, you're not better off than before. You're basically back at the same point.
Just like maybe one quick side quest that we're gonna take. I've heard from many PhDs that this topic about IP, especially on a university level, can be quite complex, and people don't really know much about it. How was your process of transferring that IP that was created within the university? So basically, it's theirs, right?
Yeah.
How is the process of spinning that out? Could you give some insights on that? That would be really nice, I think.
Complex, definitely complex, very complicated, time consuming, and oftentimes not successful, to be honest. The major problem you're facing is that there is two types of universities existing. One type is really managing their IP on their own. So whenever a PhD or whoever is filing a patent, then the university takes care of this patent, filing it, managing it, everything that is needed. The other type or the other way of doing it is that the university has a certain company who is taking care of this process. So meaning that in this case, you basically have two parties you need to negotiate with, because the university is outsourcing the process, and the company who is taking care of this is, of course, also interested in making revenues and being profitable. This is the only source they have to be profitable, is basically to either sell or license those patents. And then a share of this will also go back to the university, but also a part of it will stay with the company. So in general, when you have this, and that was the case for us, so we had the two-party version. And then you always start in the first place on, if you did not file any patents during your exist process, for example, then you have a look at the portfolio of patents of the university and see which ones you need and which ones you potentially need. and which would be nice to have, simply to have a portfolio, which we did as well. And then you start negotiating. And the negotiation process starts at the time when your venture is in almost the earliest possible stage. So you do not really have a clear idea about your product. You do not really have a clear idea about your business model. You do not really have an idea of which part of your product will be covered by the patent and if you really need it in the end. So all moving bits and pieces at this point when you start negotiating. And obviously, everyone has the MP3 case in mind. That this patent you want to have from them is the next MP3 patent that will like skyrocket and finance the whole institution for decades.
Yeah. Or the page rank with Google and
exactly.
Word.
Yes. And so this is like the mindset of the other side when they start negotiating, which is fair, which is okay, and which is understandable. But that gives us a very hard time to really frame an offer to them, or also vice versa, that makes sense in the stage where you are at the moment. Because either what you could do, okay, you provide some shares from the company to them. That's not always preferred by universities, because then they are like suddenly a shareholder, and they, of course, not only have benefits, but also obligations they need to cover with this. Or the other version is that they are providing licenses to you, and the best case or the best version would if you could buy the patent simply from them. No matter if license or buying a patent, it's in this case always about money and how much you are able to pay for it.
Sometimes it's even both, right? They get shares and the license.
Yes, exactly. And as there is not many like reference cases within Germany that where you could like say, okay, the University of Aachen, for example, did it this way, and the University of Munich did it this way, and the ones in Hamburg did it another way. So let's like somewhere meet in the middle. Most of the time, it's an extremely individual agreement you are finding when you start negotiating about the money and how much and what is the value of those patents. Then you need to make forecasts. And I mean, it's obvious that you're making positive forecasts, because otherwise you would not even like continue working on that. But that also leads to the fact that the license fees or the pricing they're making is connected to the forecasts you're making. And whenever you don't find an agreement that is feasible, I would say, especially for you as a startup, because you maybe simply don't have the financial resources, or they are offering a contract where they have like revenue participation after 5 years, then it's getting very hard to get really to an agreement. And in the worst case, you will not find an agreement, which was the case for us.
Oh, wow.
So we did not come to a point where both parties were happy. So we said, okay, currently at this point, we are not in the need to really buy or license those patents. So let's see how we continue, and at a later stage, maybe talk again to each other and then see if we can find an agreement. So and that was, I would say, even a failure before the VC failure. We experienced that we couldn't come to an agreement with the university about the patents, and we really ended up without licensing or having any agreement after we left the university.
This is also maybe a call to the university and the politics that we really have to point out that if we want intellectual property from the research to spin off and to transfer into the industries and into the companies that IP transfers into a startup, we need a clear process for that and fair environment to talk about how the contract will work and how the licensing works, and maybe like a blueprint for that for the future, right?
Absolutely.
Because I can imagine that much of the IP that is in the lab stays in the lab because of that, because it's just such a hustle to get it out.
That's a fact. And like my stake on this is, in like Germany, and I would also say in Europe, we are really outstanding in scientific work and research. But what we are failing in is to transfer this knowledge coming from the research into the industry, because the process of transferring it is such a hustle and is including such high barriers that oftentimes it stays in the lab because no one is really willing to get in touch with this process and really take the effort to transfer it. And that's like an economic disadvantage we are like really feeling in numbers. Like compared to the US, I would say, and this is one of the major obstacles we are facing. And as you said, that's really a call to the politics, that transferring knowledge from a university to the industry should be way easier, and maybe even with a blueprint, if this is the solution, to simply get it done and at least provide the opportunity to transfer it, and not like leaving it in the lab because no one is willing to tackle the process.
Especially in the political times right now, or in the economic times right now in Germany, this is a huge call for innovation.
And I mean, the point is that in Germany and Europe, most of the universities are state funded. So it's anyway tax money that is provided to the universities to do research and all this stuff. One of the major arguments for the negotiations from the university or academic side is often that if they are licensing or selling something to you, they always need to take into account that everything you have done was funded by state money and taxes, which is a fair point, definitely. But what I think they do not consider in this mindset is that whenever you have a successful company, the successful company is like the major taxpayer in our economics. And if you're creating a lot of successful companies, you're having a lot of high taxpayers.
And labor.
Exactly. Labor, which additional pay tax. And this money goes back tax-wise to the state. And the state can use it again, like to provide it to the research institutions. Yeah. And then we have a funding circle in a way that really makes sense. But not always in the first place considering, okay, we are not allowed to waste tax money, which is definitely right. But on the other hand, with this, avoiding that companies are like created that then could be future taxpayers that would create a successful economy.
Yeah. So about opportunity costs and long-term thinking, right?
Exactly.
Thank you for that incredible side quest. Coming back to the story, when you were acquiring your first pilot customers, how was it working with the first customers? Maybe share just briefly how you met them, and then what happened after that, like working together, some insights into how the feedback of pilot customers shapes the product, the end product. And what we haven't mentioned yet is that we're talking now about two organizations, kind of, which merged into one organization. Maybe give just a brief overview on this, where we are standing right now on the timeline, and then the.
So currently we are pretty exactly at the beginning of 2022. Yes, pretty much 2022. We finished the first phase of Exist-Forschungstransfer. Spent most of 2022 with working with research institutions to bootstrap, but during this time also put a lot of effort into marketing in general and being really present at a lot of trade fairs and different exhibitions connected to our field of mobility. For this reason, very likely, in early 2023, we got approached by a company that was listening to an Electrive, not podcast, but live stream, where Manuel presented our technology. And the person found it interesting what we're doing, and he was one of the tech scouts from the company. So he approached us for a first introduction call to like see what we're actually doing and if this maybe fits into the portfolio of the company. So we had some first talks and loose conversations, I would say. We've been presenting and pitching what we're doing. And this continued for quite a while, and we went through different departments of the company and got different feedbacks, but always connected to one person on the other side. who was taking the initiative to get in touch with us. And from the current perspective, I would say that was one of the most important things, that at the very beginning, we apparently convinced this one person from the other company in a way that he suddenly acted like as a, how to say this, like someone who was defending our technology internally for us without us being part of the conversation. And that was very, very important from the perspective now that he was doing so, because otherwise, whenever there is a doubt in what you're doing, then you will come to a certain point, and then there is someone who's saying, okay, don't believe in this, what the guys are doing, and then you're done. So you will not get any further, because then there was this one person not believing in you, and the topic is dead in the other.
Quick shout out to that person, because not believing is a lot easier than believing.
Definitely. So we've been like going through different departments until the point when the other side was at least clear enough about what we're doing that they said, okay, we can imagine that we would really give you money for a joint POC project, or joint development project in this case, to be precise. So after we've been through the pitching process and convincing process, the legal process started, which is at least as complex and time consuming as the pitching process, because obviously then suddenly you are confronted with a topic you're likely not really a pro in, because at least if you don't have someone who studied law in your founder's team, then you were never really negotiating about contracts, and all the details were included. So we got the first draft of the contract and we're negotiating about it. And at a certain point, then decided, okay, now it's going into so much detail that we really need support on the law side. And that's also a very important advice. Whenever you are negotiating about a contract, get a lawyer. Never, ever negotiate on your own. You will definitely be in the weaker position, and you will definitely make a bad deal if you don't have law advice at such a negotiation. So that's very important. At least in our opinion, we've been already there to sign a contract, and there was a final review. And suddenly they said, we are not quite sure if the contract is good. We need another review. And then it was already August in 2023. And we've been planning to start the POC in August. So it was quite clear that August will not happen. And we've been running out of money. I'm not telling them, obviously, because that would make us weak. But like time was ticking on our side. So the summer break happened, like not really a lot of responses. Lots of people have been on vacation.
The clock ticking in the background.
Exactly. So we catched up on negotiating in September then, obviously, and reviewed again and again and again and over again, until we've been at a point when the management level came into the game from the other side and were suddenly interested in what we're doing, and we're also requesting to see the contracts and have the final approval for this. So suddenly we had not only the contract work, but also a new pitching stage, because now the management needed to be convinced that not only the contract, but also the technology somehow makes sense. And we did this in parallel. And the end of the story was that basically in the first week, or in the second week to be precise, of January in 2024, we finally signed the contract, after we've been moving the date of signing 3 times, 1 day before the signing date. So that was the way of how we acquired our own customer. And that was also very important learning, that the acquisition process and the lead time between your first touch point and when you really sign a contract, everyone told us that in the automotive or mobility industry, this is on average 12 months. And we say, okay, we can do this way faster than everyone else. In the end, we ended up with pretty exactly 12 months from the first touch point to signing the contract. So whenever you're planning with sales, really keep in mind and really have an eye on your lead times from the first touch point to when you are potentially able to sign the contract. Because if you don't do so, the likelihood of running out of money, even if you have a good sales pipeline, is quite high, because if you don't consider it in your cash flow planning, you might fail simply on the fact that you have maybe 1 or 2 months too less of negotiation time before you're able to sign.
And can you give us some insights in the state of the technology right now? So where's the product standing?
Currently, like, we made the very first proof of concept already during university time, but we are now working on an industrial proof of concept, meaning that we are currently on the technological readiness level, if someone is familiar with this, of 6, meaning that we have proven that the technology is working in a lab with its standard functions. In our case, that's driving, charging, and managing the battery cells, and are now moving to, like, away from lab stage to, in our case, vehicle application stage in a relevant environment, how it's called.
How large is the scale? Like, is it to 15 or?
I would
100?
say if you have a regular EV in mind, like any kind of EV, I don't want to drop any names to not advertise, but when you have a regular EV in mind, and like, imagine that the battery pack pretty much covers the space between the wheels and the full width of the vehicle. This is the size we are operating in, also from the height. So simply size-wise, it's very comparable to a battery pack coming from the automotive industry.
Wow. And from the technology readiness scale, you've mentioned the 6. How large is that scale?
Until 9.
Yeah,
So,
until 9.
yeah.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty far already.
Yes, but like, the first stages are quite fast, and the later the stage, the longer the timeline in between each stage. Because when, like, to come back to our example, we are now having, like, a test system. Let's call it a test system that will be integrated into the vehicle. But whenever we are starting to test, like, the basic functionalities within the vehicle, and this is working, then to reach the next stage, we also need to start proving stuff like safety. And safety really means that you are dropping the battery pack from a certain height, then nothing is allowed to happen. And after you dropped it, it still needs to display certain functionalities, meaning that you need different cycles of testing, different amounts of testing runs, which stretches the timeline the later you are on this TRL scale, or on the TRL scale. Now, for us, it's really important to see if the industrial context works as well as the one on the lab stage. And when we have proven this, then I would say, serial development really starts. Before, it's more R&D project, that when you have proven your relevant environment and your actual application and have been successful, that's the point when really serial development starts, until the point when you have really a product that is sold in large scale.
Still, from my perspective, you're really far. Like, it really sounds great what you're doing. One of the major things automotive companies look at, especially from battery life, as most of the people know, is efficiency, battery efficiency. Battery efficiency becomes a lot better when using your product, right? Do you have some metrics what the state is right now on that?
Maybe starting why it is better, because the technological approach you can currently see in EVs who are out there on the streets, that when you have a look at the battery pack, there's lots of battery cells inside. Depending on the format, you have up to 3, sometimes 5,000 single battery cells in there, so really a lot. The point about battery cells is the production of a battery cell is an extremely complex process, not in the way that it's like so special about the materials or the way how it is produced, but rather on the way of the quality of the production. So it is extremely hard to replicate the process over and over again and always having the exact same state of quality. And this fact leads to the point that whenever you have a lot of battery cells, it is very likely that they are not all perfectly similar. But how a current EV is built, it is expected that they are all similar. And as they are not all similar, at a certain point, you will always face the fact that some of them are aging faster than the other ones. And when a battery cell ages, that basically means that it has less capacity than like its initial state. So you can experience this on your phone very well. So you buy it, you have like 48 hours of battery runtime, and then when it's 2 years old, suddenly even if you charge at 100%, you only have 12 hours. Meaning that the capacity in your battery cell has been decreasing, and that's the exact same effect also on EVs. Larger scale, takes more time, fortunately, but absolutely same effect. And this means transferred to an EV context that as the system is built in a way that all of the battery cells are connected in a fixed way, so basically by wire, whenever you have one battery cell in the system that has less capacity than the other ones, then all of the other battery cells can also only be charged to the maximum capacity of the weakest cell, limiting your whole battery pack, which doesn't really make sense when you consider that there is so many of them that you're always limited by the weakest cell. Meaning that the aging process of an EV is basically dependent on either one or a few battery cells, because they are defining what is your max capacity. So that is the first point. And less capacity means, translated into real world, less range you can drive.
Yeah.
So that's basically it. And what we're doing different in this context is that we don't have like a fixed wire connection between the battery cells, but an electronics connection between the battery cells, additionally using semiconductors to create the connection, or to create a dynamic connection to be precise, meaning that we better understand what is the state of health, and with this the capacity of the battery cells, and are also able to take into account what is the actual state of health of those batteries. And in the worst case, we can, first we monitor them, and in the second place, we are using them in a way how the battery cell, or dependent on the state of health of the battery cell. So whenever we notice that there is a weaker cell, we use it less often than the other ones, so that the other ones have the chance to catch up on aging of this single battery cell, or those fews, meaning that the overall aging process within the battery pack is slower. And most important, we're no longer dependent or limited by the weakest cell, because whenever or at any point, we can charge every battery cell to its individual maximum capacity.
That's genius.
Meaning for you as a customer, you always have the maximum capacity of your battery pack available, no matter how the individual capacity within the battery pack or the battery cells is.
By creating a dynamic system.
Exactly. Because the conventional ones are passive systems in the end.
How does AI play into that? I know that you've been part in the AI Plus Munich program as well. What's the AI component within that area?
So you need to imagine the first thing is, when you want to understand a battery, you need a lot of battery data.
Thanks for joining us for the second part of this episode. We hope you're enjoying the discussion so far. If you're ready, let's keep the conversation going. Part 3 is already available right here in the playlist. We appreciate your listening and can't wait to have you back for the rest of the story.